So the idea of this podcast or this Zoom discussion is to review what's been happening with the Citizens Assembly on Drugs Use. My name is Peter Reynolds. I'm chair of Cannabis Industry Council Ireland. I've worked in and around medicinal cannabis and drugs policy for 40 years, and that's how I make my living these days. And with me is Brendan Minish.
Hi, I'm Brendan Minish. I'm one of the directors of CRAN. CRAN's a harm reduction organisation, completely voluntarily, working in the mostly the cannabis space, but we do represent all users of substances, really. We mostly deal with the non-problematic users, and we've been advocating for policy reform in this area for a few years now. We presented at the Joint Justice Committee last year.
Yes, and an excellent contribution CRAN made to that, I must say. I think, it was the second meeting of the Citizens Assembly on the weekend just past. Today is Monday, the 15th of May. I think just to briefly catch up from the beginning, clearly the Citizens Assembly was established to look at the subject of drugs use. My perspective is that, the reason politicians do this is because they don't want to deal with the issue themselves.
Precisely. We have a long history of that actually in this area in Ireland. But citizens' assemblies have often brought us to places politically that we just couldn't have achieved otherwise. So, I'm reasonably enthusiastic about the process, at least.
Exactly. I agree. It reflects very much the fact that Ireland is this young, progressive electorate stuck inside a system which is very regressive and I suppose very much based in Catholic culture. And the fact that citizens' assemblies are what helped Ireland to.
I think it might be more of a post-colonial thing, really, because if you think about the structures of state and stuff, these are things that we inherited. Our justice system and everything follows the UK system pretty closely.
Absolutely.
Obviously, 100-odd years ago, the state needed functioning services, so it sort of lifted wholesale what it inherited. And along with that, I think, brought some of the limitations and problems. And, systems are old, our approaches need to be refreshed.
Listen, I said at the CIC meeting last week that I was joyous, in fact, about what was happening in Ireland, because it's the most exciting thing that I've seen in potentially for drugs policy reform in my life, really. And I work, as you know, I have foot in both the UK and Ireland. And if the UK could have an initiative like this, I'd be overjoyed. So I think it's wonderful, and I fully expect Ireland to leapfrog the UK as a result of it.
Yeah, I expect we will, and I'm really pleased. There's a lot of limitations with how it's gone so far, but I'm really pleased that the 99 citizens that are involved really seem to be engaging with the subject and bringing a great deal of compassion and understanding to it.
I think that is the big standout feature from what we've seen so far. I think we both had, and many other people as well, had great concerns about the appointment of Paul Reid, a man who was the chief executive of the HSE, seemed far from being impartial. And then, of course, we had concerns about Mary Cannon, the notorious anti-cannabis zealot, being appointed to the advisory board. But the incisive questioning of the 99, I think, has been wonderful.
Yeah, I share your concerns there. And, there are elements to this where it does feel like it's a citizens' assembly that was sort of set up in a hurry. And perhaps, in effect, I suppose, one of the words that's perhaps not the right word, but it feels like a cheap job compared with, say, the care that was taken around the setting up of the biodiversity one, for example. There was a great deal of care to choose an academic from an unrelated field, but who was also an excellent communicator to head things up. Paul Reid, in fairness, has grown into the role. I thought the first weekend he was quite clumsy, but I thought he did an excellent job last weekend, and can't really fault him there. I had some more questions about the facilitator who was responsible for directing questions. I felt that, some of the questions kept getting directed back to the same few on the panels to answer, and that's perhaps something I might look at.
Yes, I think the other issue, which I know we've discussed as well, is that so far, Professor Johanna Ivers said on the first meeting that 90% of drugs use is non-problematic, and indeed may well be beneficial for most people. And the reality is that so far 99% of what's been discussed has been about problematic drugs use. To put it simply, we don't base alcohol policy on alcoholics. And whilst obviously one has enormous sympathy for people who, and their stories do need to be heard.
No, and I think there's actually, we need to be careful sometimes drawing comparison with alcohol policy, because alcohol is actually such a particularly dangerous and destructive drug.
Right.
And we've brought many of its harms under control through regulation and legalization, but it's also a big trade. And, this has led to lobbying and stuff. And, one of the areas I think is very important in political circles is transparency. And the alcohol trade operates without much transparency. However, limitations and, aside, as a regulated industry, it is undoubtedly less harmful than it was as an unregulated industry.
Yes, exactly. I mean, imagine how harmful it would be if it was in the same position as cannabis.
Well, I don't think we actually need to imagine. We that experiment was tried in North America. Many of the organizations that were founded at that time are still with us.
Anyway, the point is really that I think you and I, certainly, I think many people are keen to see, more discussion over future meetings about the harms of prohibition rather than the harms of drugs.
Yeah, and actually, I think in the first week end of this, the state played its hand or showed its hand in ways that it might not normally have done. Actually, at the first weekend, we had the second most senior guarder in the land.
Yes,
tell us how important the powers of stop and search were, and then go on to explain that they use them outside of the drugs powers. They, in other words, misuse them for offences that they don't have the power of stop and search for. Now, there are good reasons police don't have blanket powers of stop and search. It's an invasive and abusive act. And, the guards cannot be, and they are doing, it's documented in a 2014 GSOC report, are using stop and search wholesale under the drugs powers to search for other things. But this is problematic in even deeper terms, because that individual once searched gets entered into the pulse system as a drug stop and search, which in turn tags them for life to have difficulty.
It was extraordinary how unself-conscious he was about what he said. It was just completely accepted that was a good reason for having drugs laws, that you can stop anybody you want to.
No, I went back and I found a report that highlights this. I've tweeted about it, and I will certainly be trying to weave it into one of the submissions I'll be involved in, because I think it's an absolute outrage, actually, in terms of how we're using our justice system. But it's very hard to get numbers for stop and search. We don't collect the stats most years. GSOC actually gave out to the guards in 2014 about this, and they went off and found them after saying they couldn't find them. And it's somewhere north of 147,000 a year. It's an outrageously large number for such a small country.
Yes, it's probably, I mean, off the top of my head, that sounds similar to the sort of numbers that we have in London, just in London.
Yeah. And London's what, 25 million people or something?
No, London's 10 million people.
Okay.
So it's still twice as many people as Ireland.
Well, I mean, I think actually, the thread there was a complete and utter disregard and lack of compassion for the people who are in problematic drug use.
And the other thing that I thought was very, very funny, although, really one shouldn't be laughing because it's so serious, is when those four members of the establishment, if you like, the authorities, were not at yesterday's meeting, but at the first meeting, were asked what they'd like to see come out of the Citizens' Assembly. Each of them said exactly the same thing, and that is they wanted more funding.
Yeah, I mean, this is the.
There's nothing about drug deaths or nothing sensible, just purely about building up their own position and their own power.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, just to jump forward for a moment. I kind of want to stay on that first week for a little bit longer, but just to jump forward, was that the wrap-up of this weekend Citizens' Assembly was that the 99 largely seemed very angry, and they were calling for more resources for frontline workers. But let's be quite clear, the frontline workers they were talking about were not the Gardaí, the fire service, and the justice system, regardless of what they wish to call themselves.
Yes, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it, though? That, I mean, funding drug treatment services is always going to be under the radar. Most people, in other words, won't see the immediate benefits of it. But it actually gives tremendous benefit to society, because we know, that something like 70% of all acquisitive crime is related to problematic drug use.
I think it's higher, actually, because there was that trial in Liverpool where they reduced acquisitive crime by drug users by 90% for the years that they ran that direct prescribing trial.
I can believe it. And I mean, all the figures about, the number of people who are in, I mean, even the governor of Mountjoy Prison said a few weeks ago, didn't he? That the people who are in prison are here, most of them are here for addiction and because they live in poverty.
Yeah.
And it's a fundamental. Prohibition is a fundamental cancer in our society, and it's remarkable how people don't appreciate this. That's the real problem. And quite clearly, there's 99C. This, I mean, I think we can see already that decriminalisation is going to be a key recommendation, can't we?
Yeah, I think we can. But it's been recommended on a number of occasions in the last 10 years in Ireland, and politically it's always sort of founded on the rocks. And one of the areas it's founded on has been about this Garda powers and around the stop and search and all of the rest of it. And actually, as a society, I think we need to push back on some of this, because in a way they're policing a problem that's made by the system that's policing it.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, the great problem with that was I can't remember what the report was, but there was that report a few years back, which was headed by Justice Garrett Sheehan.
Yeah, he's now head of SIPO, who are overseeing politicians for impropriety.
Exactly, it's hilarious, isn't it? But I mean, that as I understand it, that committee unanimously, with the exception of him, wanted to recommend did recommend decriminalisation.
Well, the justice system didn't. The justice system submitted a fully costed exercise to try and demonstrate why decrim would cost the Gardaí more than the current practice, which was ludicrous, because, of course, it was looking at the cost to the Gardaí, not the wider cost to society.
Oh, that's right.
The other thing, just before we move on from that a bit, was that on the first weekend, I don't know, did you notice, but that the second most senior in the Garda in the land used an anecdote to avoid answering a direct question, for which he should have just had a number. He was asked by a member of the audience, the 99, how many people at any one time are imprisoned for possession. And he used this rather convoluted anecdote about somebody who knows that worked in some area of the Gardaí, never having seen a case. Yeah. In fact, the actual answer is about 150 a year, or 30 at any one time. And, I don't believe that anecdote was accidental. I think he had planned to avoid answering that question.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's nonsense, obviously. I mean, there's people being prosecuted in Ireland for silly amounts of cannabis, aren't there?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to jail, but I mean, but even then, there are people being prosecuted for a couple of plants who are going to jail, aren't there?
That's right. And I mean, in one case up here in Mayo, about 18 months ago, 5 armed Gardaí were involved in the interception of one plant.
Yes.
I mean, this is a new thing, the armed unit going out all the time on these, as if it's some sort of jolly. It feels like it's intimidation, is what it is.
Yes, it is, and it's strange. I mean, I moved to Ireland in 2017, and I mean, it's been, I've definitely noticed a tightening, a hardening of attitudes from the courts and the judicial system in that period. You can see it in the, in a wider context. You can see it in the attitude towards hemp and CBD products. When I moved to Ireland in 2017, it was very easy to get a hemp license, and there was no problem about extracting CBD. Now, it's being clamped down on to an extraordinary extent, and we've got all these cases in the High Court. But that's. I mean,
we've virtually dismantled a whole branch of agriculture here. Yeah. A lot of people who had licenses haven't bothered renewing because there just isn't any agricultural route to viability anymore, where the rules are being interpreted.
There's no point. And I just wonder what on earth is behind that. It's very difficult to understand, isn't it? And I mean, as you've said before, Brendan, the big concern must be that, although we can already see some positive recommendations coming out of this assembly, will they be implemented?
I'm very encouraged, actually, to see those questions being articulated both in week 1 and week 2 from the floor. And again, Paul Reid's wrap-up yesterday was very good. I mean, he made the very valid point, forcibly too, that there's plenty of action that government can take now, and it should begin now.
Yes, he
begin addressing some of the harms here.
I think that's very much wishful thinking, though.
But for us in the activism space, it actually puts us in a useful place again, because for the wee moment, since January, effectively, everything we've been able to try and progress politically is on hold, because we have to wait till the Citizens' Assembly's finished.
Yeah, but that's what they say anyway.
Yeah, but now Paul Reid, in what he said, has opened the door again, and we should press on that, because soon the holiday season will come and our politicians won't be doing anything again.
No, exactly. Okay, so I mean, this weekend's session was very difficult to watch in some areas.
Yeah, it was,
and very moving. Some extraordinary experiences, which I think will probably be familiar to yourself and to me, because we've been in this area. But many people won't understand the degradation and the way that serious problematic drug use can can, send ripples throughout a whole family and a whole society. So it was very difficult. And clearly lots of the 99 were very seriously affected by it. So I think that's a good thing. And no doubt there'll be a lot more of this. I don't want to seem unsympathetic, but I'm just keen.
I actually think it's very important, and it's a piece that we are decoupled from a bit. We touched on alcohol policy, and the fact that alcohol certainly knows how to walk the politics. And in alcohol, there are a lot of people whose voices are being marginalised too, and they're not really being considered in how we're framing policy. And we're often framing policy that's illogical based on what lobbying interests want, rather than what harm reduction organisations are talking. And
yes, I agree. But I mean, for instance, on the other side, the thing that really drove me into campaigning seriously was, when I began to see people who didn't have access to cannabis as medicine. I mean, that in itself has similar tragic consequences. People forced or have no option to use highly toxic medicines as an alternative, which lead to all sorts of other problems, and just pain and suffering. The whole way that we manage and drugs in every respect causes so much harm.
In a funny old way, and I think that it was deeply moving, but the one thing that I heard in the round out of the voices in the morning session on Saturday was, nothing about us without us, involve us in the decision making, and highlighted in various ways how the state is abjectly failing to do that. I mean,
particularly refusing to do.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the stories were shocking, and some of the stories in the afternoon about people in the prison system and how they're being treated and everything are equally shocking.
Exactly. Frank Fagan, the previous drugs minister, I know you, Cran, eventually managed to get a meeting with him. But I mean,
it was a farcical, Peter. We sought a meeting for 2.5 years, and we were given a meeting a few days before he left office so that his successor wouldn't have to meet us.
Yes, and I mean, I was in touch through Vera Toomey. I was in touch with Michael Martin, who I think is probably I think he's a decent man for a politician, certainly. And he referred me to Hildegard Norton, and I've written to her 6 times asking for a meeting based on Michael Martin's introduction, and she's now blocked me on Twitter and LinkedIn. We sort of said it all, really, doesn't it? It's pathetic. Okay, so anything else we need to say to sum up where we are so far?
Well, I suppose talking about the second weekend, I mean, that first piece was very much about the lived experience, and it was moving, it was important. I agree, there's a missing 90% so far in this conversation, but in a way, it's okay. We're still hearing from voices that are being very affected, and what we're hearing is that the system, more than anything else, is affecting them, like it affects us too. We have better resilience. But one of the things that I think was really stark, when you had the panel that was represented the state on afterwards, where you had your man from the fire service and the senior Garda, and a retired ER doctor from Cork, was that they had heard all of this too, because they had sat through this. They had heard this personal testimony. They heard people speaking of their lived experiences and things. They could have acknowledged that in their opening. They didn't. They launched straight into the usual old dogma, fear and spin. Yes. I mean, we heard from the fire service, an opinion really that shocked me to the core, where he sort of articulated an opinion that the reason the last heroin crisis had come to an end was mainly the HIV epidemic.
Yes.
We heard a Garda, again, I assume somebody who's fairly senior, fairly qualified, that they would have chosen carefully who they sent to that meeting, who told us an anecdote about ketamine giving somebody 20 times human strength. It's fear-mongering about the drug user. It's shocking stuff.
And then Chris Luke with the nonsense about fentanyl-laced spliffs.
Well, that and many other things. He talked about, huge rises in ER visits, and he misquoted and mangled stuff from the States. It's all untrue. Actually, I think he's, in a way, done us a favor, because he's opened the door to, a formal letter, I think, to the advisory panel and Paul Reid to correct some of the misinformation, because there is actually very solid statistical data now out of North America and Canada.
There is. But I mean, the problem with all of this is that when you get people in positions of authority, and particularly medics, clinicians, who say things like this, a lot of people take them as gospel. And I mean, we've seen this already in coverage of the drugs issue. You know, we have this band of anti-cannabis zealots, the Cannabis Risk Alliance, and because they're doctors, they get given airtime.
How's it worked out for them so far, Peter? At this stage, all of the polling reliably shows that they have not got the public opinion, and it keeps getting worse. Yeah. And, you know, at the moment, there's 99 citizens, and each one of those citizens, remember how they arrived into the Citizens' Assembly? Letters were sent out to 20,000 houses, and each house had a conversation inside the house that says, oh, well, sure, maybe Mary, you go and do it, or Michael, or whoever. So before they've even arrived to the Citizens' Assembly, they have decided that they're going to be engaged with this. And, you know, it doesn't matter really which part of Irish society you're in. You've had a doctor that hasn't listened to you, who is gatekeeping you away. You or your relative is on a waiting list, or your mother was treated by a cancer specialist who was aloof and would never return calls. We, you know, as a society have experience with this, and we don't necessarily have trust anymore. No. We will question.
No, I think that's right. Fortunately, I mean, one thing I'm doing with my submission, I'm already into it, is I've got in touch with the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society in the UK, of which I'm a member myself, even though I'm not a clinician. And I am gathering together a number of testimonials from doctors who actually prescribe cannabis in the UK, including two psychiatrists, which hopefully will, you know, in factual terms, will actually counter some of the nonsense we get from Irish medicine. Okay. And anything else we need to cover?
No, not really. Other than the wrap up on Sunday was great. And if somebody's going to go and watch one thing of this weekend's Citizens' Assembly, watch the last 30 minutes, what the citizens had to say after the weekend, and then work back and watch the rest if it takes your fancy.
All right. Thank you, Brendan. Well, let's do this again after the next meeting. Okay.
Yeah, why not? I'm sure we'll be talking in the meantime anyway.
We will. Okay.